This has been a great day, and I've learned a lot. And my talk was going to touch on a number of the themes that we've already seen. And I should say, now that we've heard from lawyers and from people in the tech industry, it's time to get down to brass tacks, talk about something practical. Philosophy. So, there you go. All right, so the idea that there are human rights, I think, is predicated in part on the idea that humans have moral agency. We've already talked about that today. But what do I mean by that? Well, by agency. Well, I mean that we have certain capacities to make life plans, to engage in projects, and to make decisions. It is because humans have such agency, and I think this is something a lot of philosophers think, not just me. It's because we have this capacity, in other words, that we regard ourselves as having rights to pursue those plans, to speak freely in favor of them, and to protest their infringement. I can't imagine why free speech and protest might come to my mind as human rights at this moment in this country. So there's a connection between rights and agency that is, nothing in philosophy is undisputed, but it's pretty widely accepted. So, when it comes to AI, and again, we're all talking about generative AI chatbots, some philosophers are obsessed with the question of whether AI, that is chatbots, or perhaps future chatbots, will have the same rights as humans do. Okay? That's not my question. It's a cool question. Dave Chalmers and I have talked about it. Dave's really into things like that. He can knock his socks. I'm fine. Not my question. I'm more interested in how the AI we have now and our use of it is affecting our own agency, the very capacities that ground our rights. Particularly, how is the social integration of chatbots affecting our epistemic agency? What do I mean by that? Epistemic agency. Well, let's start out with a very minimal definition. It's our capacity to know about the world. So, on this minimal definition, I have epistemic agency to the degree to which I'm exercising my capacity to know shit. So a very easy answer to our question of how AI is affecting agency, which grounds the very idea of human rights, is this one. Chatbots expand our epistemic agency to the degree that they give us accurate information. They're tools that extend our agency, just like tools in general. That's what tools do. And why? Because we know more if we use them. So that's pretty easy, so we could go home now. There are easy problems for that easy answer. And we've talked about them already today, so I'm not going to talk about them, just list them. Well, chatbots aren't often that accurate. They hallucinate, which is to say that they say false things or bullshit in a technical, philosophical sense. There is a technical, philosophical sense. They can be weaponized to feed us disinformation. See Grok. First, I remember when he was going to call it Truth AI. Yeah, somebody else got that platform first. So even when they're accurate, though, there are linguistic blind spots, which we just talked about, Dr. Ghosh talked about, and structural inequalities built into their use and availability, right? So we talked all about that. So, and these are just some of the problems, right? I mean, there's a lot more problems. So maybe these problems can be solved. Or maybe not. I don't know. Philosopher. I want to talk about a less easy problem. Tempted to say a hard problem. That's a philosophy joke about Dave. So imagine they can be solved. This is what philosophers we do. We imagine things. So imagine that they can be solved. Yay. So suppose chatbots become increasingly accurate, and I'm going to ask you even maximally so. Suppose a lot of the problems of bias, all that stuff goes away. It's just AI paradise. Now imagine that they even become more integrated, as you would think they would, if this was the case, into what we might call our epistemic infrastructure, right? The institutions and practices that undergird our ways of knowing about the world, right? So if they become socially integrated in this way, I would say they become regarded as default information source and encouraged to be used as such. All right? We might think, to use an example that was already mentioned, Google is today. Right? So it's in fact regarded by users as a default information source, meaning it's the first thing you go to. Okay? And it's encouraged by the social structure to be used as such. It's taught in the schools, and it's used to decide, who gets research grants and who doesn't get them. All right? Now, my suggestion I'm going to make in the next 5 minutes is that our minimal epistemic agency may be enhanced in a scenario like that, even while our reflective epistemic agency is diminished. All right? So, like a typical philosopher, I'm going to make a distinction. Two kinds of agency. I said, well, our minimal epistemic agency is our capacity to know about the world. But when we talk about epistemic agency, just when we talk about moral agency, we sometimes, by we, I mean not just philosophers, but ordinary people, seem to mean something else as well. And I think you just say these are two different kinds of agency. Second kind is that our capacity not just to seek answers to our questions, that's the minimal stuff, right? We want to know things. But to reflect on those answers, right? And to be responsive to reasons. Now, in earlier work, I've called this our capacity to understand as opposed to just know. All right? It's a short talk, so you're just going to have to run with that. Okay? Lots to say. Now, these kinds of agency can come apart. All right? Let me give you an example. I'm sure you already see this, but a metal detector, handheld one, is a simple epistemic tool. It enhances our minimal epistemic agency. How? It tells you where the metal is. Answers the question. Okay? You could be trained to use this tool and use it reliably without the following things also being present. You caring at all about whether it's reliable. You can use it reliably without caring about it, without really understanding how it works, without caring how it works, without wondering why you're being asked to use it, without thinking about its limits as a tool. Obviously, I'm just saying that's a possibility. So before I went to college, I spent many years traveling around and working construction and also other odd jobs, including working the door at various places. And I'm partly drawing this from real experience. I had all sorts of jobs where I was taught to use tools, epistemic and otherwise. And I just wanted the money. And I don't feel bad about that. I didn't understand anything that I was doing. But I could use a tool. So, in this sort of scenario, the person who's like that is, in a sense, doing a good job, but they're, in a sense, they're an extension of the tool, rather than the tool being an extension of them. Do you see? And that's actually very useful. This is an aside, but something else I think about is sometimes is military ethics, words that don't go together. But soldiers are typically prized when they are extensions, all right? That they are tools. And thinking is not something you want your soldiers to do, typically. You don't want them to have reflective epistemic agency, typically. By you here, I mean, not you. I hope that was obvious. So we can extend minimal epistemic agency via tools without expanding our reflective agency. And sometimes we want that. That leads us to the point that I'm making. Over the last decade, and really before that, we've seen lots of research, which I won't cite here, so you don't have to believe this. But this group, I think, probably knows this, that validates this basic intuition. Now, a lot of it has been in the case of phone and social media use. It validates it in the sense in which the continued social embeddedness of social media as a form of information about the world has, according to lots of different kinds of research, not led to increased reflective agency. All right? Now, John Haidt, who I've battled with in the pages of the New York Times, has, I don't know what everybody thinks about his, I mean, there's some issues with his recent book and the data, but he's got a point. And part of his point about social media use and phone use is referencing this sort of data. That often when we embed epistemic tools into our society, we can increase our minimal epistemic agency, our knowledge, but not at the same time increase our understanding. And then why is that? Well, because the more unquestioning our use of a tool is, the less reflective we often are in our use of it. That's what I just said. And that can even happen at the logical limit. In another paper of mine, another version of this talk, I would have started with a thought experiment about an oracle that is embedded in a society, which actually is quite accurate. And is so accurate that the society, after a while, comes to decide to trust it with all of its questions. And it becomes embedded in the schools, in the government. And increasingly, the society just turns to it for any question as a default. You want to know from everything from how do I get to the store, to what should I buy at the store, to should I go to the store? Is it morally right to go to the store? All those questions would be asked the oracle. Now suppose that the oracle is actually right. Now if it's hard for you to imagine it being right on the should questions, good for you. So if you want, just imagine it's just right about the factual questions. And let's imagine it's right, so as not to be too science fiction-y, a mere 90% of the time. That's pretty high. So it's godlike. But suppose, in my little story, that society becomes so used to this, they actually stop thinking about whether it's accurate. If you think that's implausible, I think you should look more closely at human history. They just stop thinking about whether it's accurate. They just ask it. It's what you do. And in fact, if we were to visit and say, why do you just keep asking without checking anymore? They'd say, it's what we do. It's a ritual. It's the thing. Now, what would be true of that society? They'd know a lot, in one sense of no. Because remember, it's accurate. They know more than we would. So wouldn't they be better off? Well, good question. I call this a Delphi problem for obvious reasons. And I guess I think so much of it, I've repeated it. So I'm going to ask, and like everybody else, with some questions. And these are questions that as a philosopher, I wish that people were thinking more about. Actually, all of you here are thinking about them, so. But when I give this talk, I'm usually talking to, as I was recently, to, as the dean knows, to a bunch of hedge fund managers or AI executives. And I wish what they would be thinking about would be, do we want more knowledge at the risk of losing reflective agency, understanding? Because in the Delphi scenario, they know more, but it's not really clear they understand more. In fact, because they don't ask questions, they don't. Right? So the other question I want to ask, because this is related to rights, because no agency, arguably no rights. To what extent might exercising our rights, not having them, rest on whether we're reflective epistemic agents? If the answer to that is to a large extent, then we really do need to get busy thinking about how to enhance reflection when it comes to AI. Thank you.